Okay, the next thing we're going to do is open up the back body for the box pleat and add pleats to make our box pleat. So I'm going to separate the back here from my yoke. On my spec sheet, I have a box pleat width of 2 inches and a box pleat depth on either side, 1.5 inches. So the 1.5 inches is the actual depth of the pleat that I need to worry about. So I'm gonna add a slash and spread function and add that 1.5 inches to my center back. I'm gonna start pretty close to center back, but I'm not gonna go all the way to the side. I just need this fullness to be concentrated towards the center back for my pleat. I don't want to change the shape of my hem too much. Remember that once you've added these 2 slash lines, you can move them, adjust them using the blue dots. You can then tell the system how many slash lines you want. I'm going to use 5. And then place your lock at center back. I need to add 1.5 inches, and I have 5 slash lines, so I'm going to add 0.3 inches to each slash line to total 1.5 inches. I'm then going to select my shield to implement my slash and spread. I'm going to select the piece and click reduce points to try to get rid of some of these extra points. If it still leaves you a little bit of a jagged line somewhere, you can come in and remove some of those points, and then you can use the handles to just make sure that you have nice smooth lines on your hem. Okay. Remember, holding shift keeps your lines horizontal or vertical. All right, next I need to insert a point for my placement of my pleat. So we set a 2-inch box pleat, so I need to place this point about 1 inch. Remember, when I place a point on the perimeter, I can then enter the exact value I want that placement to be. I'm going to turn this point into a corner point. I'm going to go to Insert, Pleat, and I'm just going to make sure I click on this top edge on the left side of this corner point that I just added. Do not click directly on the corner point or it will make you a weird dart somewhere. All right, so this pleat looks good. I'm going to slide it. I'm going to change the width to 1.5, and I'm going to use the blue dot to slide it so that the edge of the pleat hits that corner point exactly. I'm then going to slide the white part of the dart at the bottom over so that the pleat is mostly parallel. If you're having trouble selecting the pleat once you've added it, come back to select and make sure you have internal components turned on. With internals turned on, you don't have to be in the pleat mode. You can actually just use the select mode to move your dart or your pleat. Okay. I'm going to re-prepare this and dress it so I can see my pleat. Now, if you see a little bit of puckering in the pleat, this is because we added a corner point, and when we add corner points, the system automatically tries to distribute the fullness between either side of the corner point, but we know we want all of the fullness to be on this side of this corner point. So you see this says 0.827 is trying to sew to this 1 inch. So I can manually slide these stitches, or I can add a corner point to the top edge and restitch. For today, since this is just a development style, I'm just going to slide this stitch on my yoke over. You see that I have 2 points that it wants to snap to. One is the end of the other stitch line, and one is to match the stitch length on the back body. So I'm going to use that one. Then I can select this purple stitch and grab the end point of it and snap it also to that green point. Okay, so now all of my fullness, that 1.5 inch difference, is concentrated over here. And now if I hit dress, my pleat should lay a bit flatter and all of that fullness should go to the side. You may want to just make sure that this also happened on your other side as well. Okay, the stitches should work symmetrically, but for some reason mine didn't, and I saw a little pucker there. Okay. So that is our pleat. If your pleat was to fold in the wrong direction, the darker white line tells you where the actual fold is happening, and you can always flip the fold direction. If you want a softer looking body, you can also uncheck ironed. It'll still keep your pleat up here, but it'll loosen your body towards the hem if you do not want a crisp pleat there. All right, the next thing we need to do is work on our sleeve. So we need to reduce the sleeve length to make room for the cuff. Our sleeve cuff is 2 1/4 inches tall. So I'm going to take off 2 1/4 inches from the bottom of my sleeve. I'm just going to do an X movement. I'm not going to slide. Because I don't need my sleeve to get wider. If I slide it, my sleeve bottom will get wider. So I'm going to turn slide off, and I'm going to use X movement, and I'm going to enter 2.25. It will move it in the X direction, so everything else on the sleeve will stay the same. Next thing I need to do is make my sleeve cuff. So my sleeve cuff we know is 2 1/4 inches. And the length of it will be the distance between, sleeve opening. Sleeve opening with sleeve close, button to button, is 7 3/4. So essentially what I want is 7 3/4 from button to button, and those buttons and buttonholes will be placed 3/8 from the edge. So 7 3/4 plus 3/8 plus 3/8 is 8 1/2. So I'm going to make a rectangle that is 2 1/4 by 8 1/2. Okay. I'm going to make this a symmetrical piece. And I can put this cuff on the other side of my screen. Okay. I'm not going to sew my cuff on yet because I need to add my placket and a pleat on my sleeve. So this notch here in corner point is where our slit is going to be able to make our placket. So like the center front, our placket will be top applied. So it will be sort of half faked, but we want an actual slit in there so that the simulation looks like the cuff slit actually opens. I'm going to use the pin tool with snap to point on, and I'm going to turn edit points off. I'm going to snap from this point. I'm going to hold shift, and I'm going to get as close to 4 1/2 as possible. 4 1/2 is the slit length from your spec sheet. Okay, and I'm going to set that down. Once I've done that, you can click escape or V to get out of that function. I'm going to choose this line, and in the line menu, I'm going to choose convert to, and I have an option down here that says slit. If for some reason your slit is grayed out and you can't select it, I would redraw your line, make sure that you have snap to point on and it is exactly snapped to that corner point. I'm going to say convert to slits, and what it will do is just actually give me a little bit of a slit at my sleeve opening that ends at this end of the internal line that I drew. Okay. The next thing I'm going to do is draw my placket pieces. So I'm just doing a regular rectangular placket that looks like this here. And the placket, sleeve placket height is 5 1/2, sleeve placket width is 1 inch. So I'm going to make a rectangle. My first rectangle is going to be 5 1/2 by 1 inch. And my second rectangle is going to be 4 1/2. This is my binding that's going to finish the sleeve slit on the inside. So I'm just going to make it 3/8 of an inch. You can make it 1/4 or half, whatever you like. And I'm going to say insert. Okay. I'm going to take the top of this sleeve placket and clone edges by offset minus 1 inch. Okay, so now that there is going to be a stitch line where the top of the slit is. I'm going to take this placket and I'm going to place it just inside of my slit. I'm going to select the edges of my placket and say trace as internal line. Okay, you can't trace these internal lines as internal lines. You can copy and paste, or I'm just going to redraw mine. So I'm going to use the pen tool, snap to the top of the slit, hold shift, and finish on the other side of the placket. Okay, I'm now going to stitch this edge of this placket to the internal line that I made, the top of the placket to the top. I may need to move my placket a little bit to make sure that these aren't twisted and need to be flipped. So that looks okay. I'm going to stitch this edge to this edge of internal lines, and I'm going to stitch this internal line to this internal line. I'm then going to stitch the top edge, the far end of my binding, to this far side of the slit. Okay, so it's going to extend from this slit edge underneath the placket, but there will be a hole there. Okay, I'm then going to stitch the top of this binding to this internal line on my placket. I'm going to flip, match, and slide. Okay, so this is essentially going to finish into the edge of the placket like so. Okay, all right, I think that's it. The last thing we need to do is add our pleat, and then we'll stitch our cuff on. So I need to go to Insert, Pleat. I'm going to click right about this notch here so that my pleat is centered. My sleeve pleat is 3/4 of an inch, so I'm going to say 0.75. And then I'm going to grab this top edge of the pleat and pull it down so that it does not go all the way to the sleeve cap. Okay. I'm going to end it about where the placket ends, and just kind of make sure that it is pretty straight. Okay. All right, the last thing I'm going to do is stitch. So I'm going to stitch, basically my cuff is going to start here, okay? And I'm going to stitch, multi-stitch with my arrows facing down. So from the cuff to this edge of the sleeve opening, starting from the slit, to the top edge of the sleeve opening, and I'm going to end at the bottom of the binding. Okay, so the binding will lay underneath the placket. And then I'm going to say done. And I realized I forgot to stitch the bottom of my placket to the sleeve opening. I'm going to do that. I'm going to flip and match and slide it. Okay, so it'll lay flat, and it'll also stitch into the cuff now. All right, I'm going to go to Arrange. I'm going to put my 2 placket pieces onto the sleeve. I have already have a second cluster here, so I'm going to actually move these bindings to the second cluster and make sure that it is dressed as flat. I'm going to move my cuff onto my wrist. I'm going to come here on the other sleeve and also make sure, oh, I didn't make those pieces symmetrical. So let's make sure we make these pieces symmetrical. Forgot that step. Okay, we can move these out of the way. Remember that we have duplicate stitches turned on, so all the stitches will come with it. And back to Arrange mode, and let's make sure that these are also in this sleeve and that they're in their own cluster that is dressed as flat. I'm going to move my cuff down to make sure that it is not twisted. It does look twisted, so I'm going to untwist it as best I can and pull it back up so that it will dress properly. And then I'm going to click Dress. If you have any puckering that's happening, you may want to re-prepare and redress. All right, the only thing I see now is that the binding is sitting above the placket. So let's make sure our sleeve is at layer 2. I'm going to make sure my binding is at layer 3 and my placket is at layer 4. Okay, and I can also make sure all of these new pieces have a details grid of 0.6. And I'll need to do that on the other side as well. And make sure these layers are also properly done on both sides. Okay, so that'll just make sure that my placket pieces are sitting in the correct layer. You may need to re-prepare and redress to get them to lay properly. Okay.